You work in the school setting, right? So how should people be telling their stories so that their personal stories, so that they can, access the education that's available to them? How should they be telling? Because I mean, they ask for personal statement. That's quite a headache for most people.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
It's like the worst question. Be honest. The most frustrating or fear-inducing question is like, tell me about yourself.
Exactly.
Like,
I hate
everybody. That question is horrible. There's no way around it though. So, I have been teaching for a number of years. Obviously, I started teaching at high school level, the teenager level, and recently I've been teaching undergraduates. And one of the things that I have taught in the past at the undergraduate level is career, really, I guess, career coaching, but preparing young people for their careers. And inevitably, what I'm always saying is you have to have an answer to the question of, tell me a little bit about yourself.
Right.
And that people always panic. And what's really funny to me is in those moments when somebody says, tell me about yourself, a lot of times they forget to say their name, which is like, in that moment of panic, you're like, your brain is firing through this, like, oh my gosh, do I talk about school? Do I talk about work? Do I talk about where I'm from or family? You're worried about all this editing that you're doing in your head that you forget the anchor statement, right? Which is always like the first place you go, your first North Star is to say your name.
Wow. That's so true. That's very true.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I can't tell you the number of times that I have been, with students and I'm like, introduce yourself. And they're like, well, I'm a science major and I'm from, New York or whatever. And I'm like, well, what's your name? Who are you? So that's my first piece of advice is, as a grounding piece, always make sure to say your name. First and foremost, your name. That also, when you say your name, you're also signaling to the other person how to pronounce your name. Which if you have a name that anyone, with my last name can be said a couple different ways depending on where you are in the world.
Right.
But you're also telling them how to say your name too, or what you like to be called. So I would start it with your name. And then the next piece I like to tell people is where they are in life. So if you're a student, say, I'm a student studying something at this university. If you're working, I would do the exact same thing. I would say, I am currently working as, and then your job title, and then the company that you work for.
Right.
And then I might also, whether you're a student or you're a working professional, this next phrase is kind of player's choice. So I would probably have a sentence or two about what your daily life is like. So if you're a student, what kinds of classes do you take? What are you interested in? Or maybe what are you hoping, what kind of job are you looking for? Like I study science because I'm hoping to go to medical school and become a pediatrician. Right. Or, I'm working in communications. So my day-to-day life often involves speaking with marketing and communications professionals around the world.
Right.
And then what I always try to coach people to do too is end with like a connection point, right? So end with maybe something about your family, where you're from, maybe even sports you played, teams that you're interested in. Like think about ending your introduction with something that's going to keep the conversation going. Because a lot of times, as an example, I'm just using the science example right now, so I'll follow this thread. A lot of times if somebody's telling me they're studying science to become a doctor, I'm like, if I'm the listener to that, I'm like, oh, what's my follow-up question? I don't know what to say. But if we kind of end it with a little bit of a human connection point, somebody might have a little bit better of an entryway into a conversation. So your goal at that point is to think about how you're going to end your introduction to keep the conversation going.
Right. Awesome.
The other thing I was just going to say too is we tend to think we have to have like a 10-minute long spiel, and you don't. You really just need like 3 to 5 sentences that in any situation you can pull out of your brain and like put into action, and you're going to feel your most confident self.
All right, awesome. So, I mean, we met in Vienna, and it was around the Drucker Forum, and particularly a conversation that was around staying human in the midst of AI. And since then, a lot has gone on in the AI world, right?
Yeah.
How do you feel about its impact on communication, and particularly in the workplace and so on? How do you feel about that?
Yeah, it's interesting you ask that, because a couple of weeks ago when Chat GPT was like all the rate, you could tell it was going through a PR surge about 2 weeks ago.
Exactly. That's what I told someone as well. I sensed there was a PR stand.
Yeah, like 2 weeks ago, it was like everybody was talking about it. And so you can kind of tell the PR cycle there. But, somebody was like, "Are you afraid for your job?" And I was like, no. Because at the end of the day, I think AI, and I think this was our point years ago when we were in Vienna in 2018. So probably 5 years ago?
Exactly.
I think the whole point was that AI is a tool. It will always be a tool. It will always support our communication. And I think it's a really valuable and important tool. I think where it comes into play is that it cannot and it should not replace how we connect with each other. So there are a lot of human interest stories that I know AI can never tell. I know that AI will never be able to talk to a family who is experiencing, a really significant and important change in life. And we need to communicate that story. AI can never really tap into these really distinctly human emotions and connection points. I think it's a tool. And I think the same way as we use Google or we use, Wikipedia or whatever it is, we use it as a tool to supplement how we show up in the world. And I think that's been the power play with like a Chat GPT is how do we use it? How do we use it to our advantage and maybe, help I know a lot of people were using it kind of to get honestly rough drafts, get them started.
Yeah.
Because we're all afraid of the blinking cursor on a blank screen. And so I think it's really, I think it's a really good tool to kind of help us warm up our brains and to have a thought partner in that process. But at the end of the day, really encouraging people to get really clear on how do we continue to humanize that? How does AI interact with human voices too versus one or the other?
Yeah, that's true. You recently wrote, there's an article that was shared where you were talking about tips for interviews so that you sort of align yourself with the interests of the institution you're trying to join. And how do you have any tips like that to share with us in terms of communicating your valuability or how valuable you are to them?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say, obviously, the interview process, whether it's for college, grad school, jobs, the interview process is always a component to really an application process. So in the context of job opportunity, what I always say is that the job interview starts at your first point of communication with that particular firm or that recruiter, that company, whatever it is. And so you have to be really mindful of what your communication looks like from that very first touch point. So whether you're submitting a job application via a portal, whether you're sending it in via LinkedIn, I want you to be really mindful and careful with the way you talk about yourself, grammar, punctuation, just be very professional from the very first point.
Wait, sorry, but before that, there's I think I've observed that there's an increasing change in mode of interacting with people from a very strict formal setting to an informal to really gauge the kind of person you are looking into hiring. And does that still play into what you're saying?
Yeah, I think what you're talking about is, there still needs to be some formality and some professionalism to it. Because I think what you're talking about is really kind of the casual or social nature of communication. And I think you can get there, but I would probably say at the first entry point, keep it pretty professional, keep it pretty formal. Because, at some companies, you'll be able to tell the culture or the language and how casual you can be. And you're probably going to have to gauge that from some of your initial communication and make that choice in the moment. But when given the choice, always choose, especially for an interview, always choose to be more professional and formal than casual right off the bat.
Right.